Need to take a second for the hairs on the back of my neck to settle down. I'm just in awe of anybody who can make a bassoon do what they want it to. I haven't evolved quite that much as a musician, and I'm jealous of anybody who has. I just love the sound of a bassoon. Charles Darwin's love life and why it matters. A lot of Unitarian Universalist congregations, Christians, theists, and atheists live in a kind of hopefully affectionate tension. I suggest, however, that if we look at it the right way, that very breadth of religious diversity can be a real source of strength for us. To illustrate my point, I'm going to use none other than that bane of fundamentalist Christians, Charles Darwin. We need to remember, Darwin was more than just the world's most famous and controversial biologist. He also lived a life of real religious struggle. His life was also a long and deep love affair with his wife, Emma, and we can learn a lot from them. In fact, his religious journey actually touched the Unitarian side of our tradition, even in his own day, so I'm going to start there. It's an important piece of Unitarian history that back in the 1860s, the American Unitarian Association used to hold an annual meeting every year of representatives from Unitarian congregations, and this eventually led to the General Assembly that we still have today every summer. But back then, they called it the National Conference. Now, anytime Unitarians get together, arguments are likely. Sure enough, at the 1866 National Conference, such important freethinkers as the Reverend Octavius Brooks Frothingham and the Reverend Francis Ellingwood Abbott, who were very well known in their day, and also Ralph Waldo Emerson, who's still quite well remembered, thought the preamble to the conference bylaws was too Christian sounding. They protested loudly, there was a huge floor fight, and the conference refused to change the wording, so the freethinkers walked out. Which just goes to show we were struggling and arguing over our religious diversity more than 150 years ago. It's nothing new. The freethinkers formed a rival group that they called the Free Religious Association. Some, like Emerson, considered themselves spiritual in nature. Others, like Frothingham and Abbott, were scientific atheists, what today we would call humanists. They held their own annual conference, and they even published a newsletter, which they called The Index. And that's where they connect with Charles Darwin. Don't forget that little tidbit, the Free Religious Association newsletter, The Index. I'm going to get back to it. Of course, Darwin was already famous by 1866. His theory of evolution was revolutionizing biology, but Darwin had never wanted to revolutionize anything. He was a wealthy, class-conscious English gentleman reluctant to risk status or reputation. And that's why he kept his theory under wraps for 20 years before he even published it. Darwin had seen what happened to upstarts in English society. Back when he was a student at Cambridge University, two notorious atheists had come to town seeking converts. Richard Carlisle and Reverend Robert Taylor had both already served serious prison time for preaching their atheism, which was the crime of blasphemy in the early 1800s. But they were still determined to spread their non-belief. They buttonholed students and citizens and challenged the faculty to a religious debate. They rented an apartment, set up a printing press, and printed leaflets condemning what they saw as the dishonesty of the Church of England. Well, the Church of England ran Cambridge University along with most of the city, and the Cambridge Dons were not about to put up with such insults. and they responded ferociously. They pulled strings to keep Carlyle and Taylor's comments out of the local newspaper, and then they went after the landlord who had rented rooms to the two men. He thought they were just businessmen until the authorities hauled him in to tell him his business license was revoked, even though he'd committed no crime. Then a well-organized mob attacked Carlyle and Taylor, and the two had to flee for their lives. Now, young Charles Darwin watched this whole mess go down, and he never forgot how efficiently religious authorities had crushed dissent, ruthlessly ruining an innocent landlord to do it. And he did not want the same fate. For a long time, Darwin's whole family had walked a fine line between free thought and respectability. His father was a radical thinker, and his grandfather, Erasmus Darwin, had proposed a primitive theory of evolution long before Charles was even born. Old Erasmus Darwin called Unitarianism no more than, quote, a feather bed to catch a falling Christian. But Darwin's mother and sister were staunch, church-going, respectable Unitarian Christians, and so was the woman he loved, his cousin, Emma Wedgwood. Charles himself was reared in the faith, mostly by his sisters, and belief was important to him. Money, leisure for pondering life's mysteries, and social and political clout to get into the school and profession of his choice, those things were important too. They just seemed to be the natural order of things set up by an all-powerful God who created all things and arranged them for the best, including the advantages enjoyed by wealthy members of English society, such as himself. Darwin had first entered the University of Edinburgh, Scotland, to study medicine, but he hated the sight of blood. He was just too tender-hearted to be a doctor in an age before pain medication. So his family talked him into attending his brother's school, Cambridge, to study for holy orders. He wasn't much of a divinity student either. Bug collecting interested him more than theology. By far, his best class was biology. And he became a fan of the Reverend William Paley, father of the so-called divine watchmaker argument, which is still at the center of intelligent design today. According to Paley, if you were walking across a field and found a watch, you'd know there had to be a watchmaker. Life is complex like a watch, so it must have a watchmaker also, namely God. Now, as a student, Darwin bought that argument, hook, line, and sinker. And when he joined the HMS Beagle as staff naturalist, he was still a confirmed creationist. But Paley was a preacher. He was not a biologist. He did not have a biologist's eye. Paley saw nature as a charming scene with bees and beetles happily going about their business, staying out of one another's way. As a bug collector, and in his 5 years on the Beagle, Darwin observed that God's creatures spent most of their time killing and eating one another. And he also noticed that human beings were not all that much different. The Beagle's travels took Darwin to nearly every corner of the British Empire at a time when the British Empire covered the world. And all the while, he was sending dispatches back to England full of observations in geology, geography, fossils, and wildlife. He didn't know it, but back home he was becoming famous as a biologist. Meanwhile, back in England, Thomas Malthus, an economist, was taking society by storm. Darwin's sisters admired Malthus's writings and sent a copy of his book to Darwin on the Beagle. Malthus calculated that population tends to increase until it outstrips its resources, and therefore people have to compete for limited resources, and those who cannot keep up are weeded out. Now, to English liberals, this was 1800s English liberalism, that meant it was useless to support the poor and destitute. They were doomed anyway. England began to pass new poor laws that abandoned needy citizens to their fates. Now, Malthus's economic theories may have been accurate, but they made for terrible government policy. Unitarian novelist Charles Dickens railed against the poor laws in such books as Oliver Twist and A Christmas Carol. The poor themselves rioted. But back aboard the Beagle, Malthus did give Darwin a useful lens for looking at the ferocity of nature. Darwin realized that William Paley had been just plain wrong. Animals did not live happy, coexisting lives. Nature was not a neat, happy design. Humans and animals competed to survive and reproduce in a cruel world that was red in tooth and claw. The weak starved or got eaten. After Darwin returned to England in late 1836, it occurred to him that as successive generations of animals competed and reproduced, small variations could give some offspring an advantage. Descendants would grow ever more different from ancestors, eventually forming new species. And he began to jot down his thoughts, and his theory of evolution slowly developed from there. And in the process, his thinking became more like his grandfather's. That was fine with Darwin's free-thinking friends and relatives who were equally radical, but the love of his life, Emma Wedgwood, devoutly believed in revelation by Scripture, salvation by Jesus, and the importance of the afterlife. Darwin's musings bothered her. She did not want to lose him in the life to come. And on the eve of their wedding, Emma sent Charles a note imploring him to read her favorite gospel, John, and think on it. And in John, Jesus says, "I am the way and the truth and the life." But later, Jesus says, "I am the vine and you are the branches. And if a man abide not in me, he is cast forth as a branch and is withered, and men gather them and cast them into the fire, and they are burned." Emma saw the Gospel of John as a pledge of Jesus' love and devotion to his followers. Charles saw those same verses as a thinly veiled threat to wreak punishment on anyone who didn't toe the line. Charles and Emma still married and became deeply devoted to one another, but their religious outlooks were always poles apart. Darwin spent 20 years developing his theory, and all the while, as he put it, he was becoming, quote, "destitute of faith, yet terrified of skepticism." Darwin was a respected scientist with respectable friends. And that was important to him. When he described his secret theory in a letter, he said it was like confessing a murder. He was proud of it and wanted it recognized. At the same time, he would get physically sick with worry about what people might think of him. He told only a few of his closest associates about it because he was afraid of the social price if word got out. To the rest of the world, as he secretly wrote, he was living a lie. For the time being, he still had, quote, "faith in a law-giving God." But as he became a father, he grew fearful of just how ruthless this God of evolutionary law could be. Strong parents, widely separated in their characteristics, produce strong children. But he was a sickly man. Stomach and digestive problems plagued him his whole life. and he also began to worry about the risks of marrying his own cousin. He and Emma produced 10 children together, and he fretted about their heredity. His favorite was his eldest daughter, Anne, who was cheerful, busy, and doted on him. She would smooth his hair back when he still had hair. I know how he feels. She would straighten his clothes and could cheer him up even when he was grouchiest. And then, at the age of 8, she came down with scarlet fever, a dangerous strep infection, and she never fully recovered. 2 years later, she had trouble sleeping nights, lost strength, and would wake up crying and complaining. And Darwin feared that she had inherited his gastric problems. Later, physicians guessed that she may have contracted tuberculosis. At any rate, the symptoms got so bad, Darwin and Emma decided something had to be done, and after a tearful farewell between mother and daughter, Darwin took the girl to a distant sanatorium where he had sometimes had his stomach problems treated. And she seemed to improve at first, enough for him to leave her for a while and go back to his research. But then in April of 1851, they received a message that Anne had suffered a serious relapse. Emma was in the last stages of yet another pregnancy and couldn't travel, so Charles packed his things and hurried to his daughter's side. To his horror, he found her wasted away, exhausted, lying in a room that reeked of camphor and ammonia. And over the next few days, her pulse weakened, she vomited constantly, went into convulsions, then became delirious. And finally, after a week of unspeakable misery, she lost consciousness and died. Darwin was devastated. He had quit medical school because he couldn't stand to see people suffer. And now he had watched his own daughter die in the cruelest possible way. He was too upset to attend her funeral. 10 years would pass before he could even bring himself to visit her grave. Both he and Emma were shaken to the core. Emma found refuge in her faith, but Charles found faith to be a savage mockery. He would later say that Anne's death tore away the last tatters of his religious belief. Now, all that happened years before he finally published his theory of evolution. He did not express his atheism in public. He had other family and social commitments to think about. If he shared his religious thoughts at all, he called himself agnostic and hedged that knowledge of God was beyond human comprehension. But privately, to Darwin, God, Christianity, and hope of salvation were the bitterest of lies. He did find solace in a couple of places as the years went by. In England, he never publicly revealed the depth of his religious disbelief, but he did strike up a friendship with the president of the Free Religious Association in America, Francis Ellingwood Abbott. He subscribed to their newsletter, The Index, and he even sent in some of his own atheist thoughts, which they printed. He was afraid to expose his atheism in his own social circles, but he did share his true feelings with free-thinking American Unitarians on this side of the Atlantic, which is why I mentioned them earlier. His other source of support and religion and everything else was Emma, his wife. As they grew old together, she fussed over him, arranged his day, managed the household, and cared for him. Even though they didn't share religious belief, she did become his support in a religious sense as well. When she was not around, he would fall prey to grief, insecurity, and, as he put it, thoughts of oblivion. After more than 30 years of marriage, she wrote him another soul-wrenching letter pouring out her faith and her love for him. The only relief from life's losses and disappointments, she wrote, was to take affection as from God's hand and try to believe that all suffering and illness is meant to help us, to exalt our minds, and to look forward with hope to a future state. Darwin could not agree with that sentiment, but he loved her all the more for sharing it. Across the bottom of that letter, he wrote 3 words: God bless you. Think about that for a minute. Darwin the atheist wrote to his wife, God bless you. He was a complete unbeliever by this time, but her unshakable faith still lifted him up. And as he grew older, he needed her and her faith and her optimism ever more at his side. Now, I suppose we live in a luckier age now. There are more cures for illness. We're more tolerant of religious dissent. Few politicians dare admit to atheism even now, but outside of small towns at least, it's not the social and professional death sentence it was in Darwin's day. Marriages between people of different religious faiths are as much the norm as the exception now. But the example of Charles and Emma's relationship still applies particularly to Unitarian Universalists. Even without the American religious connection, Charles and Emma formed a kind of miniature Unitarian Universalist fellowship between the two of them. She trusted an all-providing God. He believed in nothing beyond the forces of nature itself. But they needed one another, and they supported one another. Despite all tensions, their religious outlooks got woven into what they meant to one another, and they were both better off for that. So, may we do as well as Charles and Emma Darwin. Like them, we need one another. Like them too, we are in a special relationship which is as special as we make it. We don't all think alike. We have different beliefs and different talents. Some folks can even play the bassoon. I'm not one of them. But like Charles and Emma Darwin, we can learn to love alike. And it is when we most struggle to live in that communal religious love, and when we most extend that struggling, searching love beyond the bounds of our own congregation, that we do the religious work of making this world what we dream it could be. Different beliefs do not have to weaken us. In a way, they can be good exercise. When we come together in love and tolerance and listen without judging one another, we live a religious promise that strengthens us all. It's not always easy, but such a challenge, thoughtfully accepted, really can be a gift. And we would do well to keep in mind the religiously diverse devotion of Charles and Emma Darwin. May we bless one another with our differences just as lovingly as they did. Shalom, salam. Blessed be, and amen.
Now is the time we share those joys and concerns that have touched our hearts in the past week. For those in the sanctuary, we will first form a circle where you can raise your hand to speak. For those at home, please unmute yourself once called upon to share. Aware of our desire to connect, if you could please introduce yourself before you speak, but only if you are comfortable doing so. See you in the circle. Would anyone like to share?
Longtime members probably remember Jan Eason, but people who are new, Jan was not quite a founder, but a longtime member of our church who passed away about 5 years ago. And she had a very talented, or still has, a very talented daughter who she loved to brag about in the circles, so I'm going to do that for her today. Her daughter, Laura Eason, is a writer for plays and drama, and so she just finished a project, and it was released today on Stars, and it's called Three Women, and she was the executive producer, showrunner, and wrote 4 of the 10 episodes. So if you have access to Stars, watch it in Jan's memory, and I'm sure Laura would love that. And also, I think probably after a while, it'll show up on some other streaming service, so.
My joy is that other longtime Heartland member, Catherine Benson, is here today. She moved out to California, but she just can't stay away. So welcome back, Catherine. Yeah.
I'd like to congratulate Chef Conklin on his first time being worship associate. Great job.
Anyone else?
I want to thank Kathy Maglin for putting together such a cool visit yesterday. The women's group that gets together for dinners out at different restaurants, that in itself is pretty cool. But she got us to the Indiana Museum of Medicine, which is in the old Central State Hospital. What a wonderful tour that was, and some of us plan to go back and to take more time there. But again, anybody who's interested, any women, is it just women, or can it be any?
Well, technically.
Kind of.
The Hucksters is the men.
That's right. Well, Hucksters, you need to go visit this place. Anyway, thank you, Kathy.
And that was Dominic's idea.
Oh, that's right. Sorry, Dominic. Anyway, it was wonderful. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dick. I just wanted, excuse me, to say how much I enjoyed Dennis's presentation. I'm a big fan of Darwin. Big fan of Darwin and evolution. I think one of the things that we all aspire to, I've certainly tried this but have not been as successful as Dennis, is to give people not only information, which is great, because you told me some things I didn't really know, but also something for us to think about. And I think if you can do both of those in a presentation, that's cool. I don't know if this can apply to a household where one woman is for Harris and the man is for Trump. I don't know if that would work, but you have your own opinion on that, okay?
Anyone else? Or is there anyone online?
Yes, Stephanie.
Stephanie?
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to say, like Dick, I really, really enjoyed your talk. It was marvelous. And Netanyahu, your playing is gorgeous. So thank you for sharing it with us all.
May we hold these joys and concerns, both spoken and unspoken, in our hearts until we meet again. Reverend McCarty will give our closing words.
May we face the future not as a question which demands the correct answer, but rather as a gift which asks only to be received and occupied. The world awaits us. Our best is good enough. Tears and laughter are handy tools. Each person deserves to be challenged sometimes and loved always. May we go forth in love and enlightenment, and may our footsteps soothe and bless the earth wherever we pass.
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Our formal service is now over. If you need to leave, now would be a good time to do so. Though please know, if you're leaving, that we wish you the very best. The very best this coming week, and hope to see you again. Otherwise, we'll invite everyone to get some food and drinks in the social hall and share in more conversation. See you there.
Hi, Stephanie. I love-
Bye-bye.
Have a good
Oh,
week.
I hope you all feel better soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Stay healthy.
Thank you.